Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Breaking the Silence, a podcast where we talk about mental health, wellness, recovery, among other things. Happy holidays from Addiction Rehab Toronto to you. I'm very, very blessed to have Pamela Lopez on the show again, once again. Nice to see you. Pamela was one of our first guests when we first started Breaking the Silence, and it's really wonderful to have you back and connect on some other things that we talk about related to recovery and things like that. So Pamela is a wellness coach, talk therapist, and she does a lot of great stuff with her clients. So we're here to talk about what it is that you do and how you've been able to sort of evolve your practice over the last little bit since the last time we spoke.
Yeah, so a lot has happened since the last time we spoke. When we first spoke, my practice was very embryonic, and I knew what I was able to do, and I know that I knew I could help people with their healing and stuff like that. But what I noticed when I was trying to get everything together, there is a part of the healing process or part of the self-development process that comes right after healing that I don't know, that gets a lot of talk about, right? A lot of people are talking about, now that I've healed, what's next, right? Now, is that it?
Yeah.
And it's sort of not it. So the next phase after, healing is self-mastery, which is the part of my practice that I focus on. So you've done the healing, you're asking yourself, okay, what's next? Is this really it? Well, no, you can further your self-development process and really start to intimately know who you are, which is where self-mastery comes in. Self-mastery is it's actually a skill. It's a skill that involves knowing yourself so intimately that you not only know what triggers you, but you know how to handle your triggers. You're aware of when a negative core belief comes up and you know how to use your CBT practices effectively so that you can sort of change that. It's being aware of when your shadow self comes up during an interaction and you can bring it to consciousness and integrate it with the rest of yourself so it no longer rules or it creates any sort of impulses to destroy or self-sabotage or anything like that, right? And we talk a lot about, or the wellness space talks a lot about, building the life of your dreams and living your life in alignment and stuff like that. But all of that requires knowledge of yourself, right? Knowledge of who you are, what you want, what works for you. And all of those data points can be acquired through the healing process and then implemented in the self-mastery process. So that's where the self-mastery comes in,
Yeah, so when I think of the word self and I think of the word mastery, I think of somebody that's being able to be so consciously aware of themselves that they're able to take the things that they've learned, like awareness, giving themselves the ability to really feel when things are maybe challenging, when things are going well, when a trigger or an emotion or a feeling comes up, that they are sort of in that mode of okay, this is what I need to do.
Exactly. Okay. That's exactly it.
So do you cultivate some of the practices that people have taken? So things like CBT, DBT, those kinds of modalities, and you sort of help them just become more efficient in executing them and applying them?
Yeah, pretty much. Because the point of my whole practice is to make myself obsolete, right? So I try to, for example, CBT is probably one of the easiest things that people don't know how to use effectively, right? So they'll take a thought in their head and they'll say, for example, they'll say my partner is leaving me because they don't want to be with me, right? And that's what's happening. That's the thought that they have in their head. And they'll take the inverse of that thought and say, no, my partner does want to be with me. They're just going away to go grocery shopping or something. But what's ineffective about that is that it doesn't take away from the negative core belief that says my partner doesn't want to be with me, which is what they really believe, or my partner, is ignoring me, or whatever the case the belief really comes from, that gives the thought of, oh, my partner is going away to avoid me. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
When you think of attachment styles, you think of anxious, ambivalent or dismissive, but mostly the anxious ambivalent piece, right? Where somebody has that attachment style where it's what's wrong? Is everything okay?
Exactly.
Are you okay, right? And that's what the core belief is, right?
Exactly.
So I could be sitting here having a conversation with you. Let's say we're partners, and I say hello, and you kind of brush me off because you might have a million things going on in your head, and automatically my thought process goes to, like she's breaking up with me.
Yeah, exactly.
She doesn't want to be with me.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And then it's like that constant, like, you know, are you okay? Is everything okay? And it's that it starts to sort of seem into the correlation of codependency.
Yes.
You know, because of that belief that you have in yourself, right? So, you know, when you talk about the process of healing and self-mastery, what's the difference? Because it sounds to me like self-mastery is, in the essence, healing. It's just being more consciously aware.
Yeah.
But maybe you can tell me the difference between healing and self-mastery.
So it is blurry in a sense, but I'll tell you the difference. So I'll take an example. So let's say you have two people at work. Two people, one is healed, one is in the healing phase of their life, another one is in a self-mastery phase of their life. So, and both of these two people receive criticism at work, right? The person who has healed is most likely to feel feelings of uselessness, feel feelings of rejection, and probably take those feelings personally and say, I'm so useless. I can't believe this. I'm so, and really start to beat themselves up. And they may even take the rest of the day off or the next day to just sort of process what happened and to figure it out. And then they'll just bounce back the next day, right? Whereas the self-mastered person will still feel the feelings of uselessness, will still feel the feelings of maybe even rejection, but they know they're cognizant enough to be able to know that the criticism is not necessarily of themselves as a person, but more of their work. Gotcha. And they'll take the criticism of that work and use it as a personal insight to help develop themselves further. Like, okay, my boss didn't like this, or they criticized that. What can I do within myself to make it even better?
Yeah.
So it sort of like closes the gap. So whereas the first person, because like, even though we've healed and mastered, it doesn't make us impervious or immune to any setbacks, any feelings of rejection, or any feelings of like worthlessness, uselessness, or any of those pillars of depression. It more so closes it's sort of like, what's the word? It's sort of, is it close the gap? But it sort of like narrows like the healing process. You no longer like feel the feelings. You kind of just say, okay, I got this, and then you move on.
It fills the gap to a certain degree. It's not like, it doesn't fill it completely, but it gives you sort of better coping mechanisms and strategies to be able to deal with it. So essentially someone doesn't just fly off the handle or like, affect or impact their day-to-day life so extreme.
Exactly.
Because to the point where these thoughts sort of govern their actions and their mentality.
Exactly.
Where do you think like a lot of the intense feelings of like feeling rejected, feeling like you're not good enough, feeling like, my partner's going to leave me, like where do you think that these sort of narratives come from for people?
My personal take on that is negative core beliefs, right? So all of those are sort of sewn into us early on in life, right? Whether it be through maladaptive patterns, through our upbringing, maybe our parents were toxic, maybe we had negative experiences that sort of shaped the way that we believe, or maybe it's just repetitive events that we just chalk up to, constant rejection just says, I'm just that person who just gets rejected a lot. Nothing comes my way, right? So when you have these negative core beliefs, they sort of act as the bedrock for everything else. So when you have a negative core belief that's sort of sewn into you at, let's say, 7 years old, and then you have an experience when you're 27 and that negative core belief hasn't been addressed, it's still gonna hit that same way. So that's what I think.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, when you look at self-mastery, you think of like, wow, this is great. I can actually, level or regulate my emotions, my feelings. How do you attain self-mastery? Because it seems like, and especially for the listeners that are listening today, like it sounds like something that, it's like a dream for people, right? To be able to actually have this, and it's a big deal. But how does somebody attain that?
Essentially through practice and an unrelenting desire to be your best self, right? Those are probably the two things that you really need. But in order to attain mastery, it's like any other skill, right? So have you heard of the 4 stages of competence? Mm-hmm. You have. Okay. Yes. So mastery, since it's a skill, can be achieved through the framework of the 4 stages of competence, right? So for those who are unaware of it, I'll list all the 4 stages, which is unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence and then unconscious competence, right? So to sort of break that down even more, let's say, being here, addiction is sort of what we deal with here. So let's say the first stage which is unconscious incompetence. You don't know that you're an addict. You don't know, maybe you're seeing self-destructive patterns, you're just going out to party all the time, you're coming back late, you're sort of destroying healthy habits, you are, things like that. And then one day you just see your life sort of spiraling outward, and then you're just like, what's going on with me? People are starting to tell you, hey, Pam, you're not doing okay. And it sort of starts to hit you, which is the second phase, which is, conscious incompetence. Now you know what you don't know about yourself. And you spend the rest of the time sort of trying to figure that out. You're trying to figure out, okay, what happened? Like, how did I get this way? What triggers me? What is it about, the roots of my childhood that possibly created this depression inside of me? And you start to really work on those things and take care of them. So you start to learn your triggers. You start to learn what happened about you. You start to learn what works for you. And you get to a point where now starts to sort of trend upward. It gets to a point where now you start to practice things. You start to realize, okay, I need to form healthy habits. I need to have some sort of purpose. I need to take care of myself for these reasons. You address your underlying core beliefs. You address all of the things that kept you in that place of like scarcity or brokenness and addiction. And then you practice that so well to the point where you look back at the pictures of yourself and you're just like, who was I back then? Right. So that's sort of all the 4 stages in a nutshell. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you refer a lot to, childhood, and then sort of the way, you've grown up and how that sort of negatively affects the person as they continue to grow into adulthood and how they sort of deal with things. In your experience, working with clients, do you find that is the biggest sort of connotation that you get when people have these negative core beliefs?
It really is. It really, like, that's always the first place that I go to. The person always, I ask particular questions and the person sort of like, they tell me what's going on with them. And I say, what made you believe that? And they're like, I don't know. And then I'm like, okay, well, tell me about your childhood. That's always the first place that I go. Right. And sometimes if it's not that, then sometimes it's like your first heartbreak, right? Or your first, abusive relationship with somebody that, that wasn't very kind to you. So a lot of those things like dating when you're like 17 and up is always a nightmare. Dating is, because you're just trying to figure all that stuff out, who you are versus what you're supposed to do versus the role that you're supposed to play as a partner. You don't know any of those things, right? You don't know what a healthy relationship looks like. Yeah.
Do you feel like what is the biggest, like, you talk about, like, obviously heartbreak and talk about things that people sort of derive this negative core belief, but what do you think makes people more susceptible to how they carry it more of like an impact than opposed to others? Because, you can put 2 people in a room and one person, let's say, they both get their heart broken, right? And one person can be like, oh, okay, you know what? It sucks. It feels terrible. It hurts, but I'm going to be okay. And then you have this other one that's sort of paralyzed by this idea of this like loud noise that's like coming in their head going like, oh my God, this is really the end of the world for me. Like, nobody loves me. Nobody wants me.
Yeah.
And they have just that one example to really base it under, so how do you do you find that in your therapeutic alliance and your relationships working with people that some people's impact is a lot more dire than others?
Yeah, I see that a lot. I do. And I find that the biggest difference between those 2 examples is the community around them, right?
Yeah.
A person may not necessarily have to have a bad community or a bad influence around them, but maybe they just might have no community at all. So they don't really have any positive sort of influences to draw from. They choose, to not introspect and reflect and see, take any accountability to what's going on with them. That's possible for that. It's possible for the person did have maybe a healthy upbringing, maybe a one experience, and say, you know, this one experience is not going to faze me. So even though you have two people with similar experiences, their backgrounds, backgrounds and their current communities, whether a lack of or a poor one, will definitely take those two people and just put them on different directions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you talk a lot about community and the importance of it. You know, as long as you've been doing this and being around, you know, addiction, mental health, and, you know, dealing with some of these modalities, how important do you feel community is?
Oh, it's incredibly important. Before therapy, community, like people will go to their local priest, they would go to their mothers and fathers, they would go to their elders, they would go to, you know, teachers, and those people would sort of act as their community. You know, they would draw from those sources, and depending on the quality of those sources would really greatly impact the person, you know, that they're speaking to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you had, you know, some impact or feedback or something that you would like to say to the audience listening, to, you know, the ones that do have those negative core beliefs, or those that are struggling with addiction, substance use, or those that, you know, really want to, you know, engage in talking about or dealing or executing what you're talking about with self-mastery, what are some things that you would say to the viewers?
Challenge? No, not, I wouldn't say that. Realize when you're facing the depression and the negative core beliefs and the things in your head that, you know, that make you spiral outside of you, I think the biggest thing I would say to them would be, the biggest question I always ask them would be, who is that voice in your head that's saying these things to you? Because we're not born hating ourselves. We're not born with negative core beliefs. We're not born with a negative image of ourselves, right? Those are sewn into us. So it's somebody else's image of us, somebody else's voice in our head that we adapted into our own and made it into our own, right? Obviously, the easiest thing will be, you know, parents, right? We look up to our parents. We love them with all our hearts. Everything they do is just right in our eyes when we're kids, right? So when they say, you know, you're no good, we're gonna believe them, right? So, but when we get older, so that's what I mean by challenging the voices in your head, because it's not I 100% guarantee it's not your voice. We're not born hating ourselves. So to challenge that voice and to figure out who that voice is, you can start to sort of see it in a different light, is it to emotionally detach, whether it's to reframe it and say, and not need their validation anymore, whether it's to forgive them for what they did or who they are or whatever, you know, then you can start to, once you recognize that, you can detach it and then start to build your own framework of beliefs that are healthy and more conducive to the way that you live. Yeah,
and I think that, you know, for anybody, you know, our goal really is to build, you know, the ability to have healthy routine, healthy structure, healthy mindset, and stay consistent with that, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that that's such an important piece, and I think that you're able to get that with, you know, some of the things that you provide to your clients.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. Yeah, for sure.
Well, we're here with Pamela Lopez, mental health advocate, real strong modality in self-mastery, and you know, just a person that really wants to help and inspire people. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me again.
You're listening to Breaking the Silence. We will be back every other Thursday. Just want to say happy holidays, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Happy holidays. See you tomorrow.